The ripping sound of paper cut through the airport's drone of announcements and rolling luggage. All eyes in the first-class line snapped towards Gate C-27. There stood Brenda Gallagher, a veteran boarding agent with a face etched by years of stress, holding the two halves of a shredded ticket. Before her stood a young man no older than 19, swallowed by a simple grey hoodie. His crime. Trying to board a flight to Zurich with a ticket Brenda had decided was fraudulent. They thought he was a nobody, a troublemaker to be disposed of. They had no idea they had just publicly humiliated their new boss, and the arrival of airport security wasn't the end of his ordeal. It was the beginning of hers. John F. Kennedy International Airport was less a building and more a living, breathing organism of controlled chaos. On this Tuesday afternoon, Terminal 4 was a churning river of humanity, a cross-section of the globe flowing through a canyon of polished granite and duty-free shops, the air thick with the scent of roasted coffee jet fuel, and 1,000 intermingled perfumes hummed with a palpable anxiety. Every gate was a pressure cooker, but Gate C-27 servicing Swiss Air Flight 87 to Zurich was simmering close to its boiling point. A mechanical issue had caused a 2-hour delay, fraying nerves and shortening tempers to a razor's edge. Presiding over this simmering cauldron was Brenda Gallagher. At 48, Brenda had worked for the airline for 22 years. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a severe regulation-compliant bun, and her eyes, the color of a stormy sea, scanned the line of passengers with a practiced, weary vigilance. To Brenda, passengers were not people. They were a series of potential problems. They were oversized bags, expired passports, fraudulent credit cards, and endless idiotic questions. Her job, as she saw it, was not customer service. It was threat mitigation. She was ruthlessly efficient. "Next," she barked, her voice a gravelly command that cut through the noise. A family with 2 small, crying children approached. "Passports and boarding passes, all of them." The father fumbled with a folder, his hands shaking slightly. Brenda tapped an impatient rhythm on the countertop with her pen. Click, click, click. "Sir, I don't have all day. The plane isn't going to wait for you to get organized." The mother shot her a venomous look, but Brenda was immune. She'd seen it all. Next came a businessman, slick in a tailored suit, reeking of expensive cologne. He flashed a platinum card and a smarmy smile. "Brenda, darling, any chance of a better seat? Something with a bit more legroom for little old me." Brenda's demeanor shifted a subtle but noticeable thaw. "Let me see what I can do for you, Mr. Finch," she said, her voice losing some of its edge. She typed furiously, her lips pursed in concentration. This was a transaction she understood. Power and status were currencies she respected. As Mr. Finch walked away, pleased with his upgraded seat, the next person in line shuffled forward. And Brenda's face hardened again, the brief thaw freezing over into a polar frost. He was just a kid. Maybe 19 tops. He was tall, but carried himself with a slight slouch, as if trying to minimize the space he occupied. A plain, dark grey hoodie was pulled up over his head, casting his face in shadow, from which a pair of expensive noise-cancelling headphones protruded. He wore faded jeans with a small tear in one knee and a pair of worn-out sneakers. He held a phone in one hand and a passport in the other. His eyes focused on something on the screen. He was the very picture of everything Brenda had been conditioned to mistrust. He didn't fit the profile of a first-class passenger to Zurich, not even close. This was Javier Reyes, though Brenda didn't know his name yet. To her, he was just Hoodie Kid. and every instinct in her body screamed that he was a problem waiting to happen. He was probably flying on stolen points or a credit card his parents didn't know he was using. He was probably going to be a nuisance on the flight, demanding free drinks and annoying the real first-class passengers. Javier stepped up to the counter and pulled down his headphones, the ambient roar of the terminal flooding his ears. He offered a small, polite smile. "Hi, I just need to check in." Brenda didn't return the smile. Her eyes flickered from his face down to his torn jeans and back up. "Passport. Boarding pass," she demanded, her voice flat. Javier handed her the dark blue American passport and held up his phone to display the QR code for his boarding pass. The screen clearly read, "Reyes Javier, seat 2A, first class." Brenda stared at the phone, then at Javier. The gears of her suspicion were grinding loudly in her mind. Seat 2A, the best seat on the plane, a private suite that cost more than her monthly mortgage payment. It was impossible. She'd seen college kids in the back of the plane in the cheap seats, but never, not once, had she seen someone who looked like him in 2A. "This can't be right," she said, her voice laced with accusation. Javier looked confused. "I'm sorry. Is there a problem with the scanner?" "The problem," Brenda said, leaning forward slightly, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hiss, "is that I find it very hard to believe this ticket belongs to you." The quiet accusation hung in the air, a drop of poison in the already toxic atmosphere of the gate. A few people in the line behind Javier craned their necks, their interest piqued. The drama was a welcome distraction from the monotony of waiting. Javier's polite smile faltered, replaced by a frown of genuine bewilderment. The long, difficult day he was having was about to get infinitely worse. Javier Reyes blinked, processing Brenda's words. For a moment, he thought he'd misheard her through the residual ringing in his ears from his music. "I'm sorry, what do you mean it's my ticket? My name is on the passport. Javier Reyes. It matches the boarding pass." He spoke calmly, reasonably, but his explanation only seemed to fuel Brenda's conviction. To her, his composure wasn't a sign of innocence. It was the practiced coolness of a con artist. "Anyone can put a name on a ticket." She sniffed, her eyes narrowing. She took his passport and held it up to the light, scrutinizing it as if it were $100 bill she suspected was counterfeit. She ran her thumb over the photo, then looked hard at Javier's face. "Where did you get the money for this flight, son?" The question was so wildly inappropriate, so far beyond the scope of her job, that it momentarily stunned Javier into silence. The passengers behind him began to murmur. A woman in a pink tracksuit whispered to her husband, "Can she even ask that?" Javier felt a hot flush of anger creep up his neck. He had spent the last 48 hours in a daze of grief and overwhelming responsibility. His father, the formidable Alejandro Reyes, had passed away from a sudden heart attack 2 days prior. At 19, Javier had gone from being a college freshman studying computer science to being the sole heir and new majority shareholder of Aegis Security Solutions, one of the largest private security firms on the East Coast, with contracts at this very airport. This flight wasn't a vacation. It was a grim necessity. He was flying to Zurich to meet with the international board members and the executor of his father's estate to formally assume control. The weight on his shoulders was immense, and the last thing he had the energy for was a baseless interrogation. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to remain calm. His father had always taught him never let them see you sweat, Javi. A calm mind is a weapon. "Ma'am," he said, his voice level but firm. "My financial situation is none of your business. I purchased the ticket. My passport is valid. The names match. Can you please just scan my pass so I can board?" His refusal to be cowed was to Brenda the final piece of evidence. She saw it as insolence, a guilty person lashing out. "I am the final authority at this gate," she declared, her voice rising in volume, "and I will not allow a potential security risk onto my flight. This ticket is flagged." It wasn't, but in that moment, Brenda was the sole arbiter of reality. Flagged for what? Javier challenged, his patience wearing thin. "What possible reason could you have? There are inconsistencies," she bluffed, her mind racing. "The purchase history is unusual. We have procedures to follow." She picked up the phone on her desk and began dialing, never taking her accusatory glare off him. "I'm calling my supervisor. We'll get this sorted out." She held the receiver to her ear, tapping her pen again. Click, click, click. It was pure theatre. She had no intention of letting a supervisor overrule her gut. She was just building her case, creating a public spectacle to justify her actions. While she pretended to wait for someone to pick up, she spoke loudly for the benefit of the watching crowd. "Yes, this is Brenda at C-27. I have a situation here. A young man with a first-class ticket seat, 2A, that appears to be problematic. Yes, the name matches the passport, but the circumstances are highly suspicious. He's becoming agitated." Javier stared at her aghast. He wasn't agitated. He was being publicly slandered. He could feel dozens of pairs of eyes on him, judging him. He saw the suspicion, the confirmation bias in their expressions. Of course, a kid like that couldn't afford first class. He must have done something wrong. Humiliation washed over him, cold and sharp. "That's a complete lie," Javier said, his voice shaking with restrained fury. "I'm not agitated. You are refusing to do your job based on what? The way I'm dressed." Brenda slammed the phone down. "That's it. I've had enough of your attitude." She snatched up the paper copy of his boarding pass that she had printed from his QR code. "We have a zero-tolerance policy for fraudulent travel and belligerent passengers." And then she did it. With a sharp, decisive motion, she tore the boarding pass in half. Rip! The sound was shockingly loud in the sudden hush that had fallen over the gate area. The two halves of the paper fluttered onto the counter. It was a definitive, irrevocable act of defiance and power. "You are not boarding this flight," Brenda announced, her voice ringing with triumphant finality. "Security is on its way to escort you from the terminal." Javier stared at the two pieces of paper. Seat 2A. His last link to getting this whole nightmare over with. He looked at Brenda's smug, vindicated face. He looked at the crowd of onlookers, their faces a mixture of shock, pity, and a disturbing amount of "I knew it." In that moment, he felt utterly alone and powerless. The weight on his shoulders suddenly felt 10 times heavier. His father's words echoed again, but this time they sounded distant, impossible to live up to. For the first time since his father's death, Javier Reyes felt tears welling in his eyes. The air at gate C-27 was thick with the fallout from Brenda's decisive act. She stood behind her counter, arms crossed, a bastion of corporate authority. In her mind, she had just averted a problem, upheld the integrity of the airline, and put a disrespectful young man in his place. She felt a surge of adrenaline, the kind of self-righteous satisfaction that comes from believing you are unequivocally in the right. The murmuring crowd was her jury, and she was certain they had delivered a verdict in her favor. Javier remained frozen for a long moment, staring at the two useless pieces of paper. The sting of humiliation was sharp, but beneath it, a cold, quiet anger began to solidify. He thought about the phone call he was supposed to make to the board members in Zurich in a few hours. He thought about his father's legacy now entrusted to him. This was more than an inconvenience. It was an obstacle to his duty. As if on cue, two figures in the dark blue uniforms of the airport's private security contractor, Aegis Security Solutions, appeared striding purposefully through the crowd. The passengers parted for them like the Red Sea. The lead officer was a man in his late 50s, with a stern, weathered face and silver hair clipped short. His name tag read Donovan, and the insignia on his collar marked him as the shift chief. The younger officer trailed a step behind him, hand resting warily on his belt. Brenda's expression brightened. "Over here, officers," she called out, her voice dripping with authority. "This young man has been causing a disturbance. He's been uncooperative and is in possession of what I believe to be a fraudulent ticket. I've denied him boarding and he needs to be removed from the gate area." Chief Mike Donovan's eyes swept the scene. He saw Brenda puffed up and officious. He saw the torn ticket on the counter. And then his eyes landed on the young man in the grey hoodie. Javier had finally looked up his face, a mask of disappointment and weary resignation. Donovan stopped dead in his tracks. His stern expression slackened, replaced by a flicker of disbelief, then dawning recognition. His posture, which had been authoritative and confrontational, straightened into something else entirely: deference. "Stand down, officer," he said quietly to his partner, who looked at him in confusion. Donovan took 2 more steps forward, stopping directly in front of Javier. He ignored Brenda completely. He ignored the gawking crowd. His world had narrowed to the 19-year-old in front of him. And then, in an action that sent a ripple of collective shock through everyone watching, Chief Mike Donovan, a 30-year veteran of law enforcement and private security, drew himself up to his full height, his back ramrod straight. He brought his right hand up in a crisp, formal salute, his knuckles brushing his temple. "Mr. Reyes." Donovan's voice was deep and resonant, with a respect that bordered on reverence. "Sir, we weren't expecting you to come through the main terminal. My apologies. Your father's car is waiting for you at the private tarmac." The silence at gate C27 was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the polished floor. Brenda Gallagher's jaw literally dropped. Her mind reeled desperately, trying to process the scene. "Mr. Reyes, sir." It made no sense. This was Hoodie Kid, the troublemaker, the fraud. Javier looked at the saluting officer, his own confusion momentarily eclipsing his anger. He recognized the man vaguely from pictures in his father's office. Mike Donovan. His dad had called him the best man I've ever had. "Chief Donovan," Javier said, his voice a little hoarse. It's okay. I needed to get on this flight." Donovan lowered his salute, his expression softening with sympathy. "I was so sorry to hear about your father, son. Alejandro was a great man, a true leader. We all felt it." He then glanced at the torn ticket on the counter, and then at Brenda, and his professional gaze returned now as cold and hard as steel. "Ma'am," he said to Brenda, his voice dangerously low, "what exactly has transpired here?" Brenda felt a cold dread wash over her, a feeling like stepping off a cliff in the dark. The entire situation had inverted in the span of 10 seconds. The power dynamic she had so carefully controlled had shattered. She was no longer the authority figure. She was the subject of an inquiry from a man who had just saluted her suspect. She opened her mouth, But no words came out. Her mind was a frantic scramble of error messages. Reyes. Mr. Reyes. The name echoed in her memory. She had seen it on emails and memos in the break room. Alejandro Reyes, the founder and CEO of Aegis Security Solutions, the company that employed every single security guard in this terminal. The company that held the multi-million-dollar contract for the entire airport. Her eyes darted back to Javier, truly seeing him for the first time. Not as a stereotype, but as the person Chief Donovan was addressing as Sir. The son of the legendary Alejandro Reyes. The new owner, her new boss. The crowd, sensing the seismic shift, began to whisper furiously. The story had changed from delinquent gets caught to something far more intriguing. The woman in the pink tracksuit now stared at Brenda with undisguised contempt. The businessman, Mr. Finch, who had just been schmoozing Brenda for an upgrade, watched from a distance with a look of horrified fascination. Brenda Gallagher looked from Javier's quiet, watching face to Chief Donovan's thunderous expression, and for the first time in her 22-year career, she felt the icy grip of genuine fear. She hadn't just made a mistake. She had committed career suicide. The bubble of silence around gate C-27 burst, replaced by a frantic energy. The younger security officer, now understanding the gravity of the situation, began discreetly moving the crowd back, his voice low. "Folks, please give them some space." But no one was leaving. This was better than any in-flight movie. Brenda's mind was a maelstrom. She tried to formulate a defense and explanation, but her thoughts were like smoke. I was just following procedure," she stammered, her voice a weak imitation of its earlier authority. "The ticket, it seemed suspicious. I had to ensure the safety of the flight." Chief Donovan leveled a gaze at her that could have frozen water. "Your procedure is to publicly humiliate a first-class passenger and destroy his travel documents based on a suspicion," he asked, his voice dripping with incredulity. Or was this suspicion based on his age and his clothing? He didn't need an answer. The truth was written all over her pale, terrified face. Just then another figure arrived, practically jogging to the gate. He was a man in a crisp but slightly rumpled suit, his tie askew, a sheen of sweat on his forehead. This was Daniel Peterson, the airline's terminal operations manager. He had received a frantic call from another agent at a nearby gate who had witnessed the entire debacle. "What in God's name is going on here?" Peterson demanded, his eyes darting between Brenda, the security chief, and the silent young man at the center of it all. Donovan turned to him. "Mr. Peterson, this is Javier Reyes." He paused for effect. "Of Aegis Security Solutions." Peterson's face went through a rapid series of emotions: confusion, recognition, and finally abject horror. He knew exactly who Alejandro Reyes was. The airline's C-suite had a direct line to him. The Aegis contract was one of the most critical vendor relationships in their entire operation. To find out this was his son under these circumstances, it was a corporate nightmare of the highest order. "Oh my God," Peterson breathed. He turned to Javier, his entire demeanor changing to one of deep apologetic reverence. "Mr. Reyes, I am so sorry. I am Daniel Peterson, the manager here. There has been a terrible, a truly unforgivable misunderstanding." He whirled on Brenda, his face a mask of fury. "Brenda, what have you done?" Brenda flinched, as if struck. Mr. Peterson, I thought—" "You thought." Peterson cut her off, his voice a furious whisper. "You are not paid to think based on your personal prejudices. You are paid to scan tickets and facilitate boarding. You have created an international incident with one of our most vital partners." Javier watched the scene unfold with a detached sense of disbelief. Part of him wanted to yell to vent the frustration and anger that was churning inside him. But another calmer part, the part that sounded like his father, prevailed. He held up a hand. "Enough," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through Peterson's tirade and Brenda's panicked breathing. The gate fell silent again. All eyes were on him. He was no longer the slouching kid in the hoodie. He was the center of gravity, around which everyone else was now orbiting. "Mr. Peterson," Javier said, his gaze steady. "Your airline's reputation is your concern. My concern is that your employee has illegally destroyed my travel document and prevented me from attending a critical business meeting in Zurich." He gestured to the two halves of the boarding pass, still lying on the counter. "I need to be on that plane." Peterson snapped into action. "Of course, sir." "Absolutely. We'll reprint your ticket immediately. We will escort you onto the plane right now. The flight crew will be briefed. Anything you need, anything at all, is yours." He grabbed a new boarding pass from the printer and practically shoved it into Javier's hand, as if the physical object could somehow undo the damage. Javier took the pass. Then he looked at Brenda. She was staring at him, her face a mess of terror and a dawning, pleading desperation. She looked like she wanted to say something to apologize, but the words were trapped behind a wall of fear. "And her?" Javier asked, his voice devoid of emotion. Peterson didn't hesitate. "She is suspended effective immediately, pending a full investigation which I assure you will result in her termination. She will be escorted from the premises." Brenda let out a small, choked gasp. 22 years. Her pension. Her entire life, built around the drab routines of this airport, was dissolving in front of her. Javier looked from Brenda's crumbling world to Chief Donovan. "Chief," he said, shifting his focus, "I'd like you to personally handle her escort from the terminal, and I want a full incident report from Aegis on my desk by the time I land. I want to review the protocols that allowed this interaction to escalate." "Yes, sir. It will be done," Donovan said with a grim nod. Javier gave one last look at the scene, at the horrified manager, the disgraced agent, and the still-watching crowd. He felt no triumph, only a profound exhaustion. He turned to Peterson. "I'd like to board now. Alone." "Of course, Mr. Reyes. Right this way." As Javier walked down the jet bridge, leaving the wreckage of Brenda Gallagher's career behind him, he felt the weight of his new name, his new title settle more heavily than ever before. He hadn't asked for this power, but he had it. And as he found his seat in the quiet, luxurious cabin of first class, he realized that the hardest part of his journey was just beginning. He had to figure out how to use that power, not just for himself, but for the better. And he had to do it without losing the part of himself that was still just a 19-year-old kid who missed his dad. For Brenda Gallagher, the walk from gate C-27 to the employee exit was the longest journey of her life. Chief Donovan walked a few paces behind her, his presence a silent, looming judgment. Her colleagues, who moments ago were her peers, now averted their eyes. They looked at the floor, at the walls, at anything but her. The whispers followed her like a shadow, the story of her spectacular self-destruction, already becoming airport legend. She was taken to a small, windowless office where Daniel Peterson and a stony-faced woman from Human Resources were waiting. The meeting was brutally short, suspended without pay. "Hand over your badge. Your credentials have been revoked. Do not enter airport property until the investigation is concluded. Brenda knew what investigation meant. It was a formality, a box to be checked on the way to termination. She didn't plead. She didn't argue. She was in a state of shock, her mind replaying the moment she tore that ticket over and over again, each time with a fresh wave of sickening regret. The rip of the paper was the sound of her life tearing apart. The drive home was a blur. Her small duplex in Queens, once a source of pride, a home she had fought and scraped for, now felt like a trap. The mortgage payment was due next week. Her property taxes were already late. The days that followed were a slow, agonizing descent. The official termination letter arrived via courier a week later. The language was cold, corporate citing, gross misconduct, and violation of company's code of conduct. She called her union representative a man named George, who had helped her out of a couple of minor scrapes in the past. "Brenda, I'm going to be honest with you." George said, his voice heavy with resignation. "This is bad, real bad. Humiliating the new owner of the airport's security firm. They're calling it a partner relationship crisis. There are videos of it all over social media. The airline is in full damage control mode. There's nothing I can do. They'll fight us tooth and nail, and they'll win." She started looking for other jobs, but the airline industry is a small world. The story embellished with every telling had spread like wildfire. No other airline would touch her. She applied for retail jobs for administrative positions, but her resume screamed, "Airport lifer." She was overqualified for some, underqualified for others, and in every interview, the inevitable question came, "Why did you leave your last position after 22 years?" Her savings, never substantial, began to dwindle at an alarming rate. She started eating canned soup and toast for dinner. The lights in her house seemed dimmer, the silence deeper. Her friends from work stopped calling. She was a pariah, a cautionary tale. The real weight of her karma, however, came not in the form of a bill, but in a phone call. It was from her younger sister, Jessica. Jessica was a single mother to a 7-year-old boy, and for the past year, she had been battling a rare and aggressive form of leukemia. "Bren, I just got back from the oncologist." Jessica's voice was thin and reedy, trying and failing to sound brave. "The standard chemo, it's not working anymore. The numbers are going the wrong way." Brenda's heart seized. "No, Jessie. No, what are they going to do?" There's one option left," Jessica said, her voice cracking. "It's an experimental T-cell therapy trial. It's new, and the results have been incredible for some people. It's my only real shot." A tiny, desperate flicker of hope ignited in Brenda's chest. Okay, good. We'll do it. Whatever it costs, we'll figure it out." "That's the thing, Bren," Jessica sobbed. "It's not about the cost. The trial is fully funded. But it's incredibly exclusive. They only take a handful of patients a year. It's run by a private medical research foundation. My doctor submitted my application, but he said the waiting list is immense. He said they're funded entirely by one single benefactor, a philanthropic foundation." "Which one, what's it called?" Brenda asked, grabbing a pen, ready to write down the name, ready to fight, to call, to do whatever it took to save her sister. Jessica took a shaky breath. "It's called the Reyes Foundation." The pen fell from Brenda's numb fingers and clattered onto the floor. Reyes. The name echoed in the silent room, a ghost come to haunt her. She felt the blood drain from her face. It couldn't be. It was a cosmic cruelty, too perfect to text, too precise to be real. "Brenda, "Are you there?" Jessica asked, her voice laced with concern. Brenda sank into a kitchen chair, the world tilting on its axis. She had thought she'd hit rock bottom when she lost her job. She realized now she hadn't even come close. The fate of the most important person in her life, her sister, now rested in the hands of the family of the young man whose future she had tried to tear in half. The karma wasn't just that she'd lost her job. It was that her single catastrophic act of prejudice had potentially severed her sister's only lifeline. While Brenda Gallagher's world was contracting into a single point of despair, Javier Reyes's was expanding at a dizzying, terrifying rate. The flight to Zurich had been a blur of documents, condolence emails, and quiet contemplation. When he landed, he was met not by a taxi but by a sleek black sedan, and Walter Finch, his father's oldest friend, and the chief legal counsel for Aegis's European operations. He was the same Mr. Finch, who had charmed a seat upgrade out of Brenda not long before Javier's fateful encounter. Walter was a kind, sharp-eyed man in his late 60s. He had known Javier since he was a boy and didn't treat him like a corporate icon, but like a grieving son. "I saw what happened at the gate, Javi," Walter said gently as the car sped through the Swiss countryside. "A passenger sent me a video. I'm sorry you had to go through that." "It's fine," Javier mumbled, though it wasn't. "No, it's not," Walter insisted. "It's a perfect example of what your father was fighting against. He built Aegis on a principle of service and perception. He always said our uniforms must inspire confidence, not fear. Our people must be guardians, not bullies. What that agent did to you, it's a symptom of a sickness he wanted to cure." The meeting with the board was grueling. Men twice his age, who had known his father for decades, looked at him with a mixture of pity and skepticism. Could a 19-year-old kid really run a global security empire with over 10,000 employees? Javier didn't try to impress them with business jargon he didn't understand. He simply spoke from the heart. He told them about his father's principles. He told them about his experience at Gate C-27. That agent didn't see a passenger. She saw a stereotype. Javier said, his voice gaining strength as he spoke. And the security officers who were called, what if they had shared her prejudice? What could have happened? My father built this company to be better than that, and I will dedicate myself to ensuring it is. He then laid out his first initiative, a complete overhaul of the Aegis training program, co-designed with sociologists and de-escalation experts, to focus on identifying and combating implicit bias. He wasn't proposing a revolution of balance sheets and profit margins, but one of philosophy. And to their surprise, the board listened. They saw the steel in his eyes, the same steel they had respected in his father. They saw Alejandro Reyes's legacy, not just his heir. They voted unanimously to confirm his position as chairman of the board. Returning to New York, Javier moved into his father's penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, a place that felt more like a museum than a home. He spent his days at the Aegis headquarters, a gleaming skyscraper downtown. He was a strange sight in the corporate world, a teenager in a hoodie and jeans, sitting at the head of a massive mahogany table surrounded by executives in $1,000 suits. He pored over every report, every file, trying to understand the behemoth his father had built. He read the incident report from Chief Donovan, which detailed Brenda Gallagher's actions in cold, objective prose. Appended to it was a file on her termination and her subsequent blacklisting from major airline employment. He felt a pang of something not pity exactly, but a sober recognition of the power he now wielded. A few words from him had unmade a woman's life. He also began to delve into his father's philanthropic work. He knew his dad was charitable, but he had no idea of the scale. The Reyes Foundation was a silent giant funding everything from inner-city youth centers to cutting-edge medical research. His father had never wanted his name on a building. He just wanted the work to be done. Javier's new executive assistant, a hyper-efficient woman named Maria, brought him a stack of folders one afternoon. "These are the high-priority grant proposals for the Foundation's medical research wing," she explained. "Your father liked to review the most promising ones personally. The selection committee has narrowed it down to the top 10 candidates for the T-cell therapy trial grant." Javier nodded, taking the thickest folder. He was exhausted, but he knew this was part of his new duty. He opened the file, his eyes scanning the medical terminology and patient histories. It was a world of desperate hope, of people fighting for their lives, their chances resting on the decision made in this very office. On the third page, a particular name and photo caught his eye. The patient was a young woman with a warm, tired smile, a 7-year-old boy sitting on her lap. The name on the application was Jessica Miller. Her emergency contact and primary family reference was listed as her older sister, Brenda Gallagher. Javier sat back in his father's oversized leather chair, the file resting in his hands. The air in the vast office suddenly felt very thin. The abstract concept of karma had just materialized on his desk, bound in a manila folder. The woman who had judged him, humiliated him, and tried to deny him his future was now through her sister silently pleading with him for a future of her own. He was her faceless benefactor, her anonymous judge and jury. The irony was so thick, so heavy, it was almost hard to breathe. For 2 weeks, Brenda Gallagher lived in a state of suspended animation. She checked her sister's patient portal a dozen times a day, her heart leaping at every email notification, only to have it crash with every no-update message. She knew with a certainty that was eating her alive that the Reyes name on the foundation was not a coincidence. The universe was playing a cruel, elaborate joke at her expense. She told no one. How could she explain to Jessica that her only hope for survival might be extinguished because of a moment of pride and prejudice at an airport gate? The guilt was a physical weight pressing down on her chest, making it hard to sleep, hard to eat. Finally, she couldn't take the passive waiting anymore. Desperation clawed at her, urging her to do something, anything. She had to try. She had to face him. Finding a way to contact Javier Reyes was next to impossible. The Aegis corporate headquarters was a fortress. Her calls were screened and sent to a generic voicemail box. Her emails went unanswered. He was insulated from the world by layers of corporate protection, the same world that had so easily ejected her. After a week of failed attempts, she did the only thing she could think of. She went to his home. A bit of online sleuthing and a conversation with a former colleague who worked in executive transport gave her the address of the Central Park West penthouse. On a grey, drizzly Thursday morning, Brenda stood across the street from the imposing limestone building, a place that represented a level of wealth she could barely comprehend. She clutched the strap of her worn-out purse, her hands sweating despite the chill. She felt small and insignificant. She rehearsed a speech in her head, 100 different versions of an apology, a plea. None of them sounded right. Taking a deep, shaky breath, she crossed the street and approached the doorman, a stern-looking man in a grey overcoat. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone making it clear he doubted it. I'm here to see Javier Reyes," Brenda said, her voice barely a whisper. "My name is Brenda Gallagher. I don't have an appointment." The doorman's expression didn't change, but a flicker of recognition crossed his eyes. He had likely been briefed. Mr. Reyes does not accept unscheduled visitors. Please leave. Please. Brenda begged, her composure starting to crumble. It's not about my job. It's about my sister. It's about the foundation. It's life or death. Please, you have to tell him I'm here. The doorman's face remained impassive. I have my orders, ma'am. I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises. Tears of frustration welled in Brenda's eyes. She had come all this way, swallowed every last shred of her pride, only to be turned away at the door. As she turned to leave, defeated a black car pulled up to the curb. The back door opened, and Javier Reyes stepped out. He was dressed in a dark suit today, the hoodie and jeans gone. He looked older, more serious. He was on the phone, speaking in low, confident tones. He didn't see her at first, but the doorman, seeing his boss, gave a slight, worried glance in Brenda's direction. Javier followed his gaze. His eyes met Brenda's across the rain-slicked pavement. His phone conversation stopped mid-sentence. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. The bustling New York sidewalk seemed to fade away. Here they were again, the powerful and the powerless. But the roles were now so absolute, so cruelly defined, it made their airport encounter seem like child's play. Javier saw a woman who looked 10 years older than the one he'd met a month ago. Her face was etched with desperation, her eyes red-rimmed and pleading. This wasn't the proud, angry woman from the gate. This was someone broken. Brenda saw the man who held her sister's life in his hands. He was just a boy, really. A boy with the weight of the world on his shoulders, a weight she had carelessly, callously tried to add to. Javier ended his call. He looked at the doorman, then back at Brenda. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. He walked past her into the building without saying a word. Brenda's heart sank. He was ignoring her. It was over. But as the doorman held the door, he spoke to her in a low voice. His assistant will call you to schedule a meeting. Go home and wait for the call. Brenda stared after him, stunned. He wasn't turning her away. He was going to see her. He was going to make her state her case. The tiny flicker of hope she thought had been extinguished burst back into a terrifying, painful flame. She was going to get her audience, and she had no idea if it was an act of mercy or the final crushing blow of her karma. The Aegis headquarters was a cathedral of modern corporate power. The lobby was a cavern of black marble and brushed steel soaring 3 stories high. Brenda felt like an ant crawling into a palace. After her name was checked and she was given a visitor's pass, she was escorted to a dedicated elevator that shot silently up to the top floor. The executive suite was quiet, the air smelling faintly of leather and money. Maria Javier's assistant greeted her with a polite but cool smile and led her to a pair of large oak doors. Mr. Reyes will be with you in a moment. Brenda stepped into the office. It was vast, with a floor-to-ceiling window offering a breathtaking panorama of the city. In the center of the room was a massive mahogany desk, but it was empty. Javier was standing by the window, his back to her, looking down at the city below. "Please have a seat, Ms. Gallagher," he said, his voice calm and even. He didn't turn around. Brenda perched nervously on the edge of one of the leather chairs facing the desk. She clutched her purse in her lap so tightly, her knuckles were white. The silence stretched on, thick and uncomfortable. She had rehearsed her apology 1,000 times, but now in his presence the words felt hollow and inadequate. Finally he turned to face her. His expression was unreadable. It wasn't angry, but it wasn't forgiving either. It was neutral. The neutrality was somehow more terrifying than anger would have been. "I know why you're here." He began walking slowly towards the desk, and leaning against the front of it, choosing not to sit in the seat of power behind it. "You're here about your sister Jessica Miller. Application number 74B for the leukemia trial funded by the Reyes Foundation." The clinical, detached way he said it sent a shiver down Brenda's spine. "Mr. Reyes, Javier," she started, her voice trembling. "First, I need to say, I am so sorry. What I did at the airport was unforgivable. It was unprofessional, it was prejudiced, and there is no excuse. I was stressed and I was bitter, and I took it out on you. And I have paid the price for it. I lost my job, my career. But this with my sister, I never imagined." Javier held up a hand, and she fell silent. "Ms. Gallagher, I appreciate the apology," he said, his voice still unnervingly calm. "But let me be very clear about why I agreed to this meeting. It was not to hear you apologize. It was not to watch you grovel. Frankly, your personal feelings of remorse are of no consequence to me." Each word was a precise surgical cut. "I agreed to this meeting," he continued, "because your situation presents a perfect case study in the very thing I am now trying to fix. You made a decision about me based on your own biases. You judged my character, my financial status, and my right to be in a certain place based on nothing more than the clothes I wore and the color of my skin. You appointed yourself judge, jury, and executioner at that gate. You wielded the small amount of power you had unfairly, and you caused harm." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "And now you are here, asking me to do the very same thing." Brenda frowned, confused. "What?" "No, I'm not." "Aren't you?" He countered, his voice gaining a slight edge for the first time. "You are here asking me to use my power, my position as the head of this foundation, to intervene on your sister's behalf. You want me to see your name make a connection and push her application to the top of the pile. You are asking me for special treatment based on a personal connection. How is that any different than what you did? You want me to be the very thing you were, someone who makes biased decisions that affect people's futures." The blood drained from Brenda's face as the terrible logic of his words hit her. He was right. She had come here hoping he would be merciful. But mercy in this case would be a form of corruption, a form of favoritism, the very sin she was guilty of. "So," she whispered, her last hope crumbling into dust. "So you're going to deny her application?" "No," Javier said simply. "That would also be me using my power to make a biased decision. It would be an act of revenge. And I am not interested in revenge, Miss Gallagher. I am interested in justice." He walked over to his desk and picked up a single folder, the one with her sister's picture. "Here is what is going to happen," he said, looking her directly in the eye. "The Reyes Foundation has a blind review committee made up of 3 of the top oncologists in the country. They receive the applications with the names and personal details redacted. They judge each case solely on its medical merits, its urgency, and the patient's probability of responding to the treatment. It is a fair system. It's the system my father designed to eliminate the very kind of bias you displayed." He held up the folder. "Your sister's application number 74B will be submitted to that committee, just like every other application. Her name will be removed. Your name will be removed. She will be judged not by who her sister is or who she slighted, but by the facts of her medical case. She will be given the exact same fair chance as everyone else." He placed the folder into an outbox on his desk. It was done. The hard karma, Brenda realized with a soul-crushing certainty, was not that he would deny her sister out of spite. The hard, perfect, and inescapable karma was that he was going to be fair. He was giving her family the one thing she had denied him, an unbiased chance. She was now forced to put all her faith in the integrity of a just system, a concept she had so casually discarded at Gate C-27. She would have to wait and hope and pray, living with the agonizing uncertainty, knowing that she had no one to blame but herself. "That is all, Miss Gallagher," Javier said, his voice softening almost imperceptibly. "Maria will validate your parking." Brenda stood up on shaky legs. There was nothing more to say. She had come seeking a miracle and had been given a lesson in justice. As she walked out of the silent, imposing office, she understood that her punishment wasn't just losing her job or her reputation. Her real punishment was to be haunted forever by the magnanimous, terrible, and absolute fairness of the young man she had wronged. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a mistaken identity or an airport mishap. It was a story about the quiet, immense power of character. Brenda Gallagher's snap judgment, born from years of unchecked bias, set off a chain reaction that unraveled her own life and threatened her sister's. Her karma wasn't a loud, vengeful explosion. It was a cold, quiet justice that forced her to confront the very principles she had abandoned. On the other hand, Javier Reyes handed a world of power in a moment of grief, showed his true character, not by seeking revenge, but by refusing to be corrupted. He chose to build a better system rather than simply punish one person. He proved that the ultimate power isn't the ability to crush your enemies, but the strength to uphold justice even when it would be so easy, so satisfying to do otherwise. If this story resonated with you, and if you believe that character is defined by how we treat others, especially when we have the upper hand, then please hit that like button. Share this story with your friends and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories where karma delivers its most powerful lessons. And let us know in the comments, what would you have done in Javier's shoes? We read everyone. Thank you for listening.